All right, we're live. Welcome to Dive into World Building. I'm Juliet Wade, and today we have a guest. This is unusual. I don't usually have a guest to the first of the month, but this was the date that I could work out with the remarkable Khaalidah Muhammad-Ali, and she is awesome, and we are excited to talk to her today. So, welcome, Khaalidah.
Thank you for having me.
I think we may actually have some more folks coming in who want to talk to you in a few minutes, but we might as well just dive in, as they say. So, Khaalidah is an author, and she's also an editor, which gives her a unique perspective on the business from two different directions. I guess it's hard to know where to start because you have a lot of amazing stories out there, and in several senses. So, actually, how about we start with this? Do you have favorite and non-favorite things in world building, and are they different on the editing side from the authoring side?
I think for me, in terms of world building, I don't have anything specific that I like, but I do think that what I look for when I'm reading stories and when I'm writing stories is I want to feel something. So when I get stories that come to me through Slush, that are passed up to me to read as an editor, there isn't anything specific I'm looking for, more than how much is this story going to capture me. I'm not looking for specific types of characters. I'm not looking for these stories to take place in specific types of places. I want these characters to make me feel something. I want to care about them. I want to be intrigued by where they're taking place, and I need something to be happening fairly quickly. So I think when I'm writing, I'm also pulling at emotional stuff as well. So I think when I'm writing things, I usually start with I'm sort of a pantser. I don't usually have a plan in mind, and I write with Spencer also. So, he and I have a story that we work on together. He does all the planning, and I'll follow a plan, but I don't write any plans for myself. So when I'm writing a story, I start with a character or a feeling, and then I sort of shoot from there. And that's pretty much what I look for when I'm reading stories as well.
Okay. This is cool. So do you have, for example, a research process that goes into your writing?
That depends on what I'm writing.
Right. So let's say you're writing something and you run into a topic that do you write first and then find places where you need to do research later, I guess is the question?
Usually, yes, because I don't always have a clear idea of where the story is going to go anyway. So I'm often doing research in the midst of writing. I would say I rarely finish writing anything and do research later. And I don't typically I'm not really good at writing and rewriting later. When I'm working on a story on my own, I am writing, rewriting, and revising and editing as I go. Yes. So if anyone were to ever see something that I'm writing mid project, it always looks pretty clean because I'm always reworking what I've already got there, which is probably not the best way to do it. but that's kind of how I work it.
Sure. I think actually that sounds. I'm a planner, but I still rewrite while I'm going along. So
I think doing it that way also helps me figure out what's going to happen next.
Mm-hmm. So you have a recent story that was in Tor.com with Spencer, right?
No.
She didn't co-write that one. She just did a lot of last minute fixing it for me.
Lots of last minute fixing it for you. Okay. Well,
Do eternal gratefulness. But the story we're working on is still in edits, which is actually it's my fault. It's my turn to give it a kick.
Is that something that you can talk about?
Sure.
I would love to hear about it.
I'm trying to think how we thought of it. I think it was during the Olympics. I think her name is Khaalidah Muhammad, the Muslim African American woman who I think won awards for fencing.
Yeah.
And we were on Facebook, and we were just sort of jiving off of how cool it would be to have a story with a Muslim woman who was a sword wielder.
Mm-hmm.
And we sort of started emailing, crazy ideas back and forth, and then we started actually writing something. And I think at first I thought we were going to do like a comic book or something. And then I thought it was going to be like a short story. And then I thought it was going to be like a novelette. And then I think we ended up writing something like 40 or 50,000 words.
Yeah. 40,000. It's a novella. And then we got ideas for 2 more.
Wow, well, that sounds fruitful.
Yeah.
So what we have now is a Wild West fantasy story with a character who a Muslim woman who uses magic and wields a sword and she's also middle-aged and a mother and not your usual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's hijabi Zorro. That was what that Olympian said, and I was like, gosh, the world needs a weird Western about a hijabi Zorro.
For sure.
So this is what we're working on. And I think both of us tend to world build kind of by the seat of our pants, or at least we did on this project. So that's one of the things we're working on now, is bringing some of the different cool stuff that was fun in drafting in line with some of our plans for later books.
Mm.
I'll let Khaalidah talk about that.
Yeah. So what's happening? Did the Western thing jump straight out of the phrase Zorro, or was it something that you questioned at the beginning?
I don't know. I think that might have been Spencer. I mean, it's been over a year now, and I think he has a better handle than I do on who said what when. Because for me, it's all so mushed together now for me. I can't remember like where I began and he ended and vice versa anymore.
Sure. That makes sense. So can you talk a little bit about the time period that you've chosen for the story?
This is just a post-slavery.
Okay.
1800s, like around El Paso, but it's a magical El Paso.
little bit of alternate history.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Well, be more specific. What do you mean?
Oh, I'm just saying, what are some of the characteristics of that setting and how your character fits into it? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, the character has just lost her father to racial violence. Her father is an immigrant, so she is not born from slaves, but she is Black and Muslim. So she's kind of an outsider a double outsider in the time, and sort of sheltered, and sort of lives on the edge of a small town that is, mostly white folks, and there are Native Americans in the area. And with the death of her father, she finds herself financially strapped, and she had a husband who was pretty much a deadbeat and is kind of going it alone with her 2 children, and has decided to do a train robbery to get herself out of dire straits.
Of course, the husband, the no good husband, shows up right when she's at her lowest, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, maybe we'll bust out this criminal mastermind who will get you some money. And the criminal mastermind, when they bust him out, because, one heist wasn't good enough, we had to put 2 heists in it. The criminal mastermind says, oh, I don't actually have any money for you, but you could help me rob this train. The train is made out of a dead dragon because, we like that sort of thing.
Just for fun?
Well, the dead beasts are a big plot point. That's where a lot of the magic comes from. So there's magical creatures that have been dying out. And I think that's one of those world building things we're still kind of fine tuning, but it was definitely, I think, the big motivation for me on that. I don't know. I don't know what Khaalidah. My big motivation was, well, I want a train robbery where the train's made out of a dragon.
He's definitely the swashbuckler.
She's the heart of the story.
All right. So is it a fun world to play in, Khaalidah?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Super. And do you think that, I mean, what can you tell me what kinds of people, are there lots of different cultural interactions between lots of different people in this story? Yes. It sounds like she's in a unique position relative to the various cultures of the area.
Yes. She does meet some people and befriend people who were once slaves. She becomes very good friends with a Native American woman, and this criminal mastermind is Japanese.
Cool.
And a swordsman, so of course. I think you get what we're setting up there.
Okay, so this is interesting. So I'm getting the sense this is sort of like a superhero origin story for this woman.
Yes, sort of, kind of it is.
That's awesome.
It is, definitely.
That's cool. And what is her connection with magic?
She can do magic, but has always been taught that it is forbidden. And so this is one of the things that she struggles with. I mean, she has some struggles with spirituality and faith, and between doing right, doing right and wrong, and making these decisions in difficult times. So there are a lot of underlying difficulties that she's having above and beyond the obvious problems she's having with the death of her father and the financial problems and this deadbeat husband. She's very human, and she's very lonely, and she's grieving. And so there's all of that for her to overcome and work through in the midst of these bigger problems, or not bigger, but these more obvious problems.
Yeah. Sort of the external conflict versus the internal conflict kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Boy, I can't wait to see it. It sounds like it's going to be amazing. Kimberly's asking how her kids factor into the story.
Oh, well, initially in this first story, they are quite young, and I don't want to say they don't factor, but they don't play as huge a role as we plan to have them play in the second book, when they're a little bit older and will be wielding some magic of their own.
Yeah. And then the third book, I think, they're going to rescue her is the plan.
So what does the magic consist of? I mean, what kinds of things do people do with it?
Well, not everyone can use magic, and some of the magic system is still not quite honed yet, but not everyone can use magic. There are magic schools, and there are some people who, while they might be able to use magic, are not allowed to use magic. And she is one of those people. But for some reason, the authorities have not been alerted to her usage of magic. We haven't quite figured that out yet.
Which part? Like who the authorities are, or what exactly they would do, or
why they haven't been able to tell that she is using it. But there are some jinn involved as well, or a jinn involved. There is a jinn involved with her.
I think both of us, at least with this story, was like we built a character, we built a story, and then we sort of world built, and then the world building influenced where the story was going and the character, and then we wrote some more, and then we world built some more. So it's kind of, and it's a feedback loop. Khaalidah talks about how much I plan, but I don't, I'm no Brandon Sanderson. I don't basically write an RPG module before I write a book. Some writers do. And I mean, it seems to be popular, but I like the idea that
fortunately we don't all have to do that in order to make story, because
one thing we're seeing now is a lot of the character's journey in the first one. We're now looking at how do we hone and tweak the magic system to make her journey most, I don't know, you say, Khaalidah, to make her journey kind of have the most oomph from how the magic works. Yeah, you think so?
Say again?
It seems like we're kind of honing and tweaking the magic in response to how she changes as a character.
Yeah. I think part of our hiccups with the magic system, I know for me, were where the power, or where the bulk of the power originated. Because we mentioned the magical creatures that have been dying off, and there are bones under the ground. The bones are buried under the earth, and she was sort of drawing her power from the bones. So there was sort of, is she drawing the power from the earth, or is she drawing the power from the bones? And is everyone doing it that way, or is it just her? And I think we decided that it's just her. That is her way of drawing her extra power. But also she has sort of a protection or a guardian with her jinn as well.
Cool.
I've got to run to catch a bus, so I'm going to leave Khaalidah on her own. So,
all right. Thanks for stopping in, Spencer.
Don't quiz her too hard.
No. Me never.
All right. I'll see y'all. I'll see you, Khaalidah. Talk soon.
Cool. So when we talk about a magic power in this context, this is I know I'm going to move on from this story eventually, but I'm still curious. So when we talk about magic power in this context, what are people doing with it? Or should I say, what is she doing with it? You know, moving things or what precisely?
Initially, she was doing nothing. So, you know, in Islam, and she is Muslim and practicing, and her father, who she lived with and who she had deep abiding respect and love for, didn't, you know, really pressed it home to her that she should not use this magic. And it's something that she has access to, that she was born with, and that came from her mother. And her mother is not with her. Her mother passed away a long time ago. And so she really doesn't know that much about it. She just knows that she has it and does not know a lot about how to control it, or she just doesn't know anything about how to use it. She just knows that it's there. And she was always encouraged to leave it alone. I'm sorry, hold on a second. All right. And she was always told to leave it alone. And she did. After her father passes, and her no good husband comes back, and he says, I got this idea. Let's go break out this criminal, this warlord, and help him, you know, do this robbery. And you can use your magic. Initially, she's like, you know, I'm not going to do this. You know, you're crap, and I don't know why you're here. And, you know, she's got the sense of guilt. She doesn't want to use it, you know, because her father said she shouldn't.
Yeah. And
religiously, she knows she shouldn't. But she's also feeling a bit of guilt about her father's death, because even though physically she could have done nothing to help him, she was present when he was killed. Could have used her magic to help him, and she didn't, because he told her not to.
Right.
So she is having this moment of crisis, this crisis of faith, and she has a breaking point. And finally, she sort of looks at her circumstance. Suddenly the bank comes, and they've got this heathen Black woman, and she no longer has the protection of her father. And they want the money on this farm, and they're giving her a certain period of time to give it to them. And she's got these two daughters, these twin girls, to take care of, and she's got nothing. And she's hurt and she's angry, and she's like, you know what, I'm going to do this. and she decides she's going to use this magic, but she really doesn't know how.
Mm-hmm.
So to the best of her ability, she uses what she does know to get this criminal out, but he knows how to use magic. And when she breaks him out, he says, I don't really have that much. This guy, your husband, I don't know what he was talking about. I don't have anything, but I know how we can get something, and I can teach you how to use this magic. And so starts this sort of journey that she goes on. She realizes that this guy she's kind of intrigued by him. She knows he's a criminal. She's kind of intrigued by him, but then she realizes he's not quite what he seems either. So her crisis of faith goes even deeper. She's kind of disappointed all around by everyone. And part of this is because she is quite naive about life in general. She's been pretty sheltered. Even though she's made it to her like mid to late 30s, and she hasn't had a lot of life experiences. Her father has kept her very protected. So she's got a lot of anger and a lot of innocence that she's getting a rude awakening.
Very cool. So, let's see. I would like to talk about some of the other things that you have done. I am. There are many options. Do you have a favorite story that you would like to tell everyone about?
That I've read or written?
Written.
I think Concessions is probably my favorite. Mostly because I've lived with it so long, and probably because I would most likely write something bigger in that world eventually.
What is it about the world that appeals to you and makes you want to explore it?
I think when I first started thinking about concessions, it did not look the way it does now, but it was sort of born out of sort of a fear and disappointment about how we respond to people nowadays who are different than us.
Yeah.
And so the story sort of takes place post religious war, and it doesn't really talk much about the war itself. And it's not really America, it's America-like, but it's pretty broken down. It's pretty destroyed. So there are major cities that are still thriving, but the land is pretty scorched. And in order to live in the cities, you sort of have to agree to sort of renounce any belief system, anyone. And so if you don't renounce that any belief system, then you have to stay out in the hinterlands. And so my main character lives in the hinterlands and is a doctor, and she is Muslim, but she caters to whoever in the hinterlands needs to be taken care of, regardless of their faith or whatever. But one of the problems is that women are having difficulty having children. And there are so few children being born. But when she finds that she is pregnant and that she is actually carrying a viable pregnancy, she makes the choice to make that concession and renounce her belief system and go back to the city because she thinks it's going to be a better life for herself and her unborn child. And, you know, I just started, you know, it had me thinking about, you know, what would you do in a circumstance like that? Or if not for, you know, your kid, if it were another kind of circumstance, what would you be willing to do for that security? Because, I mean, you could carry it in your heart. I mean, no one has to know, right? But I mean,
right.
Is it enough? For some people, it's not enough. Some people, that's not a concession they're willing to make. And it just had me thinking, you know, is it fair to ask people to make that concession? Because some people feel like they have to make that concession now.
Right.
I mean, there are women now who feel like in order to work and move in society freely, they have to remove their hijab. And they do, so that they can conform, so that they won't be harassed. And it's something that, you know, I often think about.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the things that I like about your work in general is the way that faith weaves into the questions of the story. And it always seems to have a different role in different stories, but there's always that level of complexity there, which is really fantastic. So do you, let's see, you have stories that you've written that do not feature Muslim people, right? Or do you?
Do I? Yes. Yes. I had to think, because sometimes, I think sometimes they are in my head, but it may not be something that is necessarily a feature.
Yeah, or maybe obvious in the story. I was just curious. It's neither here nor there. I think there's a great depth and richness that comes with that examination of Muslim faith. And it's one of the things that makes your work so powerful. So,
I mean, I think like in, like, for example, in my story, Talking to Cancer, I don't know if people are aware that the characters in that story are Muslim. They are, but it is never mentioned. It is not a feature of that story.
Didn't you co-write a story about two sisters feuding in space?
Yes.
I loved that. And it never occurred to me to think of whether they were Muslim or not, actually.
You said feuding in space?
Yes. It's awesome. If you haven't read it, go read it. Where did that come from?
Where did it come from? Okay, so I wrote that story with Rachel K. Jones, and I think she and I have a like a bucket list of things that we wanted to do. And I think writing a story together was on that bucket list. And we've been talking back and forth about it. And so we decided, let's just start this. And I think she started the story. So she just, I can't remember, maybe I started it. Whoever is, okay, so the sisters are Ziza and Anita. She is Anita and I am Ziza. So whichever sister is first, that's who started that story. And we emailed each other back and forth until that story was done. And it was fly by the seat of our pants. There was absolutely zero plotting. And it was an absolute blast to write. It was a blast. It was just a blast.
You can tell in the writing that you were having way, like, too much fun.
We did. We were cackling back and forth while we were writing that story. We were, and we like kept upping the ante, like to see like if we could just outdo each other every single time.
Mm-hmm. It worked really well.
Thank you. It was awesome. We had so much fun.
Cool. So can you tell me, since I haven't read this particular story, what the context, how are they in space?
So the story is called Regarding the Robot Raccoons Attached to the Hull of My Ship. And it is actually being featured. It was published by Diabolical Plots, and it is in Year's Best SF, edited by Neil Clark, by Nightshade Books. Just came out. It was such an honor. And it is about two sisters who are racing each other to Mars. And they're arguing about terraforming the planet, and one wants to and one doesn't, and they are sending each other like emails back and forth as they're going, and they're like rehashing like stuff that they've done to each other over the years. And they like have completely different personalities. So Nita is a little crabby and a little mad. And I think Ziza is kind of hippie-ish, love everything, love everyone. Why you so mad? It's not my fault I'm pretty. And, really compassionate. And they just argue and bicker the whole time, but they do make up in the end. And we actually have started a second story, a sequel between the two sisters.
Awesome.
But it was so much fun. It really was. It was a joy to write.
And it was so different from the, like, you get a lot of, terraforming Mars info dump sort of literature, and that was so not that.
It was actually less about terraforming Mars and more about their relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my favorite part of that story was just the little details, like when like Anita's like, here are all the reasons why I hate you. Like your blue eyeshadow, and you know, like silly things. And um, Ziza sends her, you know, even though they're mad at each other, Ziza sends her, you know, a meal, like, you know, some beans and like cornbread. Um, but in the cornbread pan, there were like some little, I think like nanites that like ate through the hull of her ship while she was sleeping or something like that. You know, so they're like doing little dastardly tricks. And then Anita had like tricked her and like created all these fake videos of their mother sending messages back from Earth saying that she was super sick and she needed help, and to trick Ziza to go back home instead of go to Mars. But Ziza figured it out that it was fake because her mother said things like, "You were always my favorite." And she knew that her mother would never say anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I loved all those little details.
Yeah, those are cool. Sorry, I'm over here writing notes.
It's just that you don't tend to see a whole lot of like sisters talking to each other in SF at all, and that was. I have an older sister. She's 5 years older than I am. That's the worst spacing ever. And we did things like this. And so to see that come out in a story is like, no, I totally get this. I am not having a problem identifying with either of these people in this story. Mm-hmm. Or with the robot raccoons, frankly.
Was that one of the pranks then?
No, Ziza first of all, Ziza was not a fan of terraforming Mars because apparently their father had sent them away to have alone time when they were younger on Mars. And they found an as yet undiscovered species of creatures, little tiny creatures there. And she did not want to terraform Mars because she did not want to destroy these creatures. So this is the reason why she didn't want to go there. But she was sort of a conservationist, and she had raccoons. And that's why the robot raccoons.
So she still has raccoons, only now they're robots?
Yes.
Wow. That's cool. Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm taking out of our conversation is how much the interpersonal relationships form the core of a story. That's what I'm hearing you say. And I think, in fact, that that those are connected to the way the world works as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So we might not think immediately of interpersonal relationships when we think of world building. And yet the characteristics of a world will come out of interpersonal relationships and how they grow and change over the course of a story, which I think is cool.
I think for me, what is happening in the world of the story only matter as much as I can tell how it's affecting my characters. Mm-hmm. For example, I mean, I love dystopian fiction, but all of the intricacies and details of that story only matter to me if I can see how my character moves through that world. I love that type of grittiness. And like, for example, in my story Concessions, my character spends a lot of time in the desert.
Mm-hmm.
So it was so important to me for the reader to see her try to eke out her crops in that desert, and not be able, be desperate to try to grow food in that desert environment, and be desperate to do that, and for them to try to hunt food, just to be able to show how they were struggling with that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have shown any of that if that didn't matter. In other words, if they weren't struggling with food and they weren't struggling with trying to find a way to live, I wouldn't have taken the time to show any of that. So it only matters to me if I can show the reader how that affects my characters.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. So, other questions from the folks around? Kate, do you have more thoughts?
What I have thoughts about are it's sort of like, does your perception of your story change when it's recorded? Like, is the reading and the podcasting part of it, does that tend to affect how you feel about the story after you've gotten done writing it?
Well, I've had 2 of my stories podcasted, and it does not change how I feel about the story or see the story, but it definitely doesn't sound the same to me as when I read it myself. And I am one of those people who reads my stories aloud. So in the writing process, I'm always reading my stories out loud for tone and inflection and nuance. And so I don't hear those things when someone else is reading it. And so it doesn't sound the way, to me, it doesn't sound quite the way I think it should sound. And so while I think that the narrations were always fine, I always feel like I should have narrated it myself.
Does that ever feel kind of like the same way as sort of having a story published and realizing that people are going to read kind of their own things into it?
I definitely know people will read their own thing into it, and I actually like that. I can say that I rarely look at comments of my stories when they're published. I won't say never, but when I do, I kind of dig when I see people trying to pick apart the meanings, and sometimes they're off base in terms of what I intended. But I like when people get something out of it, even if it wasn't what I intended. I like that people are getting something out of it, that even if it's different, I like that. Do you think you'll narrate your own stories? I don't know if I'll narrate my own stories in the future, Kimberly. I don't know. Sometimes I mean, I'll say the first story that was ever a podcast of mine was Boris's Bar. And the person who read the story, I think, is a fantastic narrator, but I don't think she was right for the narration, she had a very young voice. And Boris's bar is really gritty and mature. And she sounded like she should have been reading for YA. So I think if I was ever asked to narrate my own story, I might do it if I felt like my voice was right for it. But if I didn't feel like my voice was right for it, I wouldn't do it. How do we get Spencer moving on the edits? I have to do some of those edits too. Spencer is being hard on himself. There's some stuff that needs to be, like, I guess, rewritten, and I have to do some of that too. But when you have editor stuff to do sometimes, you know, and then the day job, and then, you know.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Yeah, none of us have any idea what that's like.
Time is a tough thing to find sometimes.
But I will say this, when we first started working on it, it was like slow going at first, and because I think he was working on probably working on his own, like his like other stuff, because he just had a series of books come out, and then like he got finished with a chunk of stuff, and then we moved through the last, I think, half of that book probably in a month, like. Wow. Wrapped it up really fast, and then went through edits. Like I did the first round of edits, and then he did another, like he did second round, and like it was like snappy, and then we got it out to readers, people to beta read for us, and it was it like happened like really, really fast. And then we got it back, and then we both got busy on other stuff, and it slowed down, and I haven't looked at it in a while. So it's going to be a minute, I think. But what usually happens is, like, once you set eyes on it, then all of a sudden you like make time for it, because then you get all jazzed up about it. So I think I just need to like start looking at it. And then I'll tell everything else to stop for a minute and then get through it.
Cool. Well, we just hit 5 o'clock. So I'm going to say thank you, Khaalidah, for coming on the show. It was really a pleasure to have you. And thank you for telling us so many interesting things about your work. And
thank you for having me.
It was awesome. And we look forward to seeing your future work. Obviously, we've got some folks here already champing at the bit to see to see the things that you're working on now. So this is good. Anyway, let's see. So next week we'll be back to Tuesdays, and I am going to start exploring this idea that was suggested to me, which is to put together a set of more basic world building topics to use as a kind of initial set of introduction, sort of to like an introductory list for people who are visiting the website and don't want to get lost in these minute little topics. So I have a number of people who have suggested helpful things to me. I'm always looking for more helpful suggestions on what the basics of world building are, but I think I'd like to start doing that next week. I just haven't put my finger on exactly how to word the topics yet, so I will update you guys with that. And with that said, I'm going to say thank you again to Khaalidah, and I'm going to stop the broadcast.
Thank you.